The rain had been falling for hours when Thomas Reed saw the small figure collapse under the flickering streetlight outside his rundown apartment building. And in that moment, his already fragile life split open in ways he could never have imagined. The girl looked too thin for the cold, her jacket torn at the sleeve, her shoes soaked through, and something about the way she curled inward on the wet pavement made Thomas feel a deep, aching pull in his chest. He was a poor single father barely holding his life together, a man who counted every dollar in every prayer. Yet that night, with thunder shaking the sky and his own daughter asleep upstairs, he made a choice that would bring a millionaire to his door by morning and change everything he believed about kindness, sacrifice, and miracles. If you believe that kindness still matters, that second chances can change lives, and that small acts of love can create big miracles, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories like this one. Thomas had not always been poor. Years earlier, he had worked steady construction jobs across Ohio, dreaming of buying a small house with a yard where his daughter Sophie could play. But after his wife passed away during a complicated illness, grief hollowed him out, and missed days at work slowly turned into lost contracts. By the time Sophie was 6, Thomas was juggling odd jobs, stretching grocery money, and learning how to be both mother and father while quietly mourning the life he had lost. Their apartment smelled of old paint and cheap detergent, and the walls were thin enough that neighbors' arguments seeped through at night. But Thomas tried to make it a home filled with warmth and safety. Every night he prayed softly that Sophie would grow up gentle in a world that had not been gentle to him. The girl outside that night was named Grace, though Thomas would not learn that until much later. All he knew in that instant was that she was shivering, alone, and clearly lost. Against his better judgment and the fear that whispered he could not afford any more trouble, he wrapped his worn jacket around her shoulders and guided her upstairs. He made her sit at the small kitchen table while he warmed leftover soup on the stove, the familiar sound of bubbling broth mixing with the steady drum of rain against the windows. Sophie stirred from her sleep, padding into the kitchen with sleepy eyes, and without a word, she offered the girl her favorite blanket, a quiet act that broke Thomas's heart with pride. Grace ate slowly, as if afraid the food might disappear, her hands trembling less with each spoonful. Thomas noticed the bruises on her arms, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the way she flinched at sudden sounds. He did not ask questions that night. He simply let her rest on the couch while Sophie curled up beside her, two children bound by an unspoken understanding of fear and comfort. Thomas stayed awake until dawn, sitting in a broken chair, listening to the rain fade into silence and wondering what kind of world allowed a child to end up alone in the dark. By morning, sunlight crept through the cracked blinds, illuminating a truth Thomas could no longer avoid. Keeping Grace safe meant stepping into a situation far bigger than himself. He cleaned his apartment as best he could, brewed weak coffee, and prepared himself to call local shelters once offices opened. He never expected the sharp knock that echoed through the hallway, heavy and confident, so different from the hesitant taps of neighbors. When Thomas opened the door, he found himself staring at a man in an expensive coat, flanked by two quietly alert assistants, his eyes filled with urgency and barely contained relief. The man was William Carter, a self-made millionaire whose name appeared regularly in business headlines across the Midwest. Grace was his daughter. She had run away after a family argument that spiraled into fear and confusion, and despite private investigators and frantic searches, she had vanished into the night. William had followed a faint lead to the neighborhood, never imagining he would find her safe inside the apartment of a man who could barely afford breakfast. When Grace appeared behind Thomas, wrapped in Sophie's blanket, alive and unharmed, William's composure broke, and he collapsed into gratitude so raw it silenced the room. Thomas felt exposed, suddenly aware of the peeling paint and mismatched furniture, but William did not seem to notice any of it. All he saw was his daughter breathing, standing, alive. As the assistant stepped back to give them space, William learned what Thomas had done, how he had taken in a stranger without knowing who she was or what trouble it might bring. For a man accustomed to power and transactions, the purity of that act shook him deeply. Thomas explained his situation with quiet honesty, speaking of Sophie, of loss, of doing what felt right even when it was hard. What followed was not the instant miracle Thomas might have imagined in movies. There were conversations, social workers, and careful steps to ensure Grace's safety. William insisted on compensating Thomas, but Thomas resisted, explaining that kindness was not a transaction. That resistance only deepened William's respect. Over the following weeks. William visited often, bringing groceries, helping Sophie with school supplies, and listening as Thomas shared his struggles without shame. Slowly, opportunities opened. William connected Thomas with a stable job managing facilities at one of his companies, a position that valued Thomas's work ethic and integrity. It was not charity, it was trust. Life did not transform overnight, but it changed steadily. Thomas moved Sophie into a modest house with a small yard, just as he had once dreamed. Grace, now back in school and healing, visited often, her laughter filling rooms that once echoed with loneliness. Thomas learned that wealth could mean more than money, that true richness lived in relationships forged through compassion. William learned humility and the power of a simple act done by a man with nothing to gain. As months turned into a year, Thomas often reflected on that rainy night. He remembered how close he had come to walking past, to choosing safety over kindness. He watched Sophie grow into a girl who believed deeply in helping others, shaped by the example of a father who chose love when fear would have been easier. And he knew that whatever blessings had followed were rooted in that single trembling decision to open his door. If this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you that even in hard times your kindness can matter more than you know, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel so these stories of hope can keep reaching the world. Before this story ends, we have one special request for you. Comment below and tell us whether you believe small acts of kindness can truly change destinies. On some nights, when rain taps gently against the windows, Thomas still whispers a prayer of thanks, not for the job or the house, but for the chance to be the kind of person who stops, who sees, and who opens the door.